All right, I'm here with Harrison Koehli, the author of Political Ponerology Substack about the nature of political evil, and in particular about the book Political Ponerology by, I want to say Lobachevsky, but that's a mathematician. Um,
Well, yeah, same pronunciation. That's right.
same pronunciation, really. I
Yeah.
thought I was way off. The host of the Mind Matters podcast. I think the Twitter bio says it best. I like books, justice, truth, beauty, and bacon. I just like politician, lies, idiocy, and vegetables. If there's anything you want to add to that, can
Well, I also like UFOs. I mean, I'll add that in
nice.
there.
It's solid. So your writings are mainly about evil as a topic of study. Like, how would you define evil clearly and precisely, and why does it emerge?
Well, that's a tough one. I'd start where Lobachevsky starts, just for the purposes of this conversation. So for him, evil is a pretty well recognized thing among humans. It's those behaviors, those actions taken towards others that intentionally cause harm to others. So that's the place where he is starting from. So, I mean, I know there's all kinds of philosophical discussions we could get into about the nature of evil, including things like, I can't remember what they're referred to, but kind of like a natural evil in the sense of like a hurricane or something that causes damage, but that is ascribed to, an act of God. He's talking about evil committed by people, and the most common, or the most, I wouldn't say the most common form, but the form most universally recognized among humans would be, for instance, the abuse of a child, the sexual abuse of a child. And that seems to be something that no matter what culture you enter, no matter what part of the world, if you find, well, not entirely, but if you find random creepy guys molesting children, I mean, chances are that person's going to get lynched in the streets, or in a dark alley somewhere, or in prison. So that's the starting point that Lobachevsky uses in his book to say, okay, we've got these phenomena, we've got these behaviors, these actions that historically and contemporarily humans tend to consider evil. Well, what is the explanation for that? How can we understand that scientifically? That's where he put the focus of his kind of his research, his career in Poland in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And as a psychologist, kind of made the pretty basic observation that the behaviors that we consider to be evil are committed disproportionately, perhaps 80, 90, maybe even 100%, by people who have identifiable forms of psychopathology, whether this is a heritable personality disorder, a character deforming brain traumatic brain injury, or the kind of the influence of being raised by a person with either of the former two forms of psychopathology. So that's kind of the starting point for Lobachevsky and for political ponerology. Of course, there are other dimensions of evil, getting into more of a metaphysical nature, which I've been kind of uh, in my in the last couple months, I've been kind of getting into that a bit more on my Substack, and I've hinted at it in previous writings, like last year too. But it's not really an area that Lobachevsky focuses on.
Yeah, that kind of segues into something I've been curious about is like, if people are, let's say, genetically or just by how they were raised, predisposed to psychopathy and evil, then isn't, like someone who is a moral relativist would say, like, that's an excuse for their behavior. Would you agree with that?
Expand on that a bit. So they'd say that's an excuse for their behavior. Go into that a bit more for me.
Yeah, like how, like if we're just evil as an accident of our nature and not
Mm.
by a free choice, then how can you hold someone culpable for that?
Right. Okay. So Lobachevsky has an interesting take on this, and that is, so he's kind of this strange mixture of what you might call like conservative and liberal beliefs, whether it's in politics or in just kind of his humanitarian outlook. So you've got some passages where he seems like a total total peace loving liberal, and other times where he's kind of like a hard nosed conservative, and it's hard to know where he's going to come down on a particular issue. So with this one, he he kind of has elements from what you might say are two opposite perspectives on this. So on the one hand, he says, and he believes that we shouldn't moralize about this type of evil. That moralizing, thinking like, oh, that's an evil bad person, or that was a bad choice, we should actually kind of reserve that for what we consider normal people. So like if we've got some kind of relationship, if we're friends or something, I should basically reserve my judgments for a guy like you who has the potential to do good and to fall, to fall much higher than from a much higher height than I would for like this, psychopath born in a really shitty environment with terrible parents and kind of no support system. It's kind of it seems like there wasn't a lot of free will involved. And so for Lobachevsky, I get the impression that he kind of implicit in his writings is a kind of hierarchy or scale of free will, where normal people have a certain amount of free will, you might say, and then like a psychopath has virtually zero free will. It's that the psychopath would be the most mechanical of human types, and that for him the most obvious forms of evil are a result of a lack of free will, are a result of just acting on with very little self-control on like basic impulses. And for the psychopath, there are these very basic impulses, and there's no higher part in their psyche to act as a control, like a controlling mechanism, as a well, getting into another psychologist, Dabrowski would call it a just disposing and directing center. There's nothing inside them, no soul to say no, to have like free won't. It's just like, okay, I want that, I'm going to take it. And so from that, he basically thinks that, we should just look at them scientifically and treat them scientifically, but very humanely, with the acknowledgement and the understanding that they can't do any better. But that is not to say that we should excuse their behavior, and like, because these two things go together very often, and that would be kind of this relativistic approach that you alluded to. That because this person can't control it, it's just their biology or whatever, therefore we can't hold them culpable. But there's a third option in this, and that is that this person can't control himself, therefore he should be segregated from society and put in a hole somewhere so that he doesn't do anything, that he can't harm other people, because it's a virtual certainty that he is going to harm other people. And that's the case with that's the interesting thing about psychopathy, is that like psychopathy is one of the biggest indicators for recidivism. So if you let a psychopath out of prison and you think they're reformed, well, chances are they're just going to do the exact same thing the instant they get out of prison. There's very little, perhaps no inner capacity for actual reform among these, like, 40 out of 40 or even 30 out of 40 psychopathy checklist scores. It's like that's their personality. It's ingrained. They cannot change, and the only thing you can do is kind of like put a box around them or stay out of their way, because very little free will as we imagine it in ourselves to be able to change our own behavior to become better people. There's no motivation for that, and there's probably a complete lack of capacity for that. Again, going back to Dabrowski, he called that developmental potential. And so from this scale of zero developmental potential, like at the level of a psychopath, to what we might consider the kind of the almost like a saintly figure who can totally transform his or her psyche, the structure of their mind, to become become an exemplar of humanity and engage in that transformative process.
Yeah, so the usually like the study of ponerology has been, and the study of evil has been kind of intertwined with the study of basically demonology throughout, you know, history, including, you know, various like superstitious traditions. But what do you think about like the spiritual or metaphysical reality of evil as opposed to as an emergent phenomenon?
Well, I think that that evil in the world is a reflection of kind of, you might call it a higher archetype. I use various words on my, you know, on my Substack, whether it's like a poneric telon, or morphic field, or, you know, almost like this. What are some others? Like an attractor. That there's kind of like a non-physical template for behavior, kind of like a type of, or, you know, a category of being, essentially, and that would include thought patterns, emotional patterns, and behavioral patterns that essentially gets that one can become entrained in. And that's kind of how I see everything that occurs in the physical world, as the physical expression of kind of a non-physical probability or possibility. And so every time we're thinking, feeling, or doing something, or observing something, that is the embodiment, the manifestation of a potential that is inherent in the fabric of reality. And so naturally, if because that's the way I kind of see things, then evil, the expression of evil, would be an expression of that cosmic, you know, evil potentiality. And in a kind of stratified reality of layers built upon layers. And the way I think about it is kind of information, nested fields of information. So we've got like the very basic physical information of particles, and then chemistry, which is built on top of and utilizing that level of information, and then biochemistry, which is another layer on top of that, and then you know, human thought, and then there are probably a few other layers above that, I'm thinking. And that so we can have this kind of totally abstract level of the kind of evil cosmic templates, but then potentially what you might think of as higher beings that also embody that level of evil. And that, you know, traditionally that might have been what people have referred to as, and tried to study as, demons, or and there might be even categories within that.
Yeah, and then why does evil, getting back to like your main focus, why does evil emerge so prevalently in political and economic structures?
Well, I'd probably come to two basic reasons. One is that it is the kind of goal of evil to take control and to be at the top. So you have this very strong motivation on the part of you know, people embodying this kind of evil archetype to get into the positions that are most conducive to them being able to do what they want. And so it's if we take a kind of microcosm, you can look at a pedophile. A pedophile will place himself in a position where he is most likely to be able to have access to children and to get away with it. The best, you know, the best options for that are people who have, you know, access to children, whether it's a teacher or a priest, or you know, a pillar of the community. Ideally, they'd want to get into a position like that. And then once they're there, that this is where the second element comes in, is people's ignorance, and people's their ignorance, and their lack of understanding, and their unwillingness even to consider certain possibilities. So that's where you get these are kind of the moral faults of normal humanity. And so this might be the parent who says, who ignores the red flags of, you know, their kids spending an inordinate amount of time with you know, with this older gentleman that just seems to, you know, have a very strong interest in the child. And then, you know, someone might say, well, isn't that kind of weird? Shouldn't you be concerned about that? Oh no, he's, you know, he's a great person. You know, we often don't want to think badly of others, and it is that tendency to not want to think badly of others, to want to think the best about them, and more, you know, more radically, the maybe even the belief that evil doesn't exist, you know, that everyone is good, and that, you know, maybe it's just some kind of weird anomaly when these kinds of things happen. So on a practical level, the reason that I'd say that the reasons that evil is so prevalent is that, one, we are not very well trained to see it. We don't know what to look for. I mean, we've got a pretty good idea of what evil is, when we experience it, but we don't really have the training from a young age of essentially knowing the red flags, you might say, knowing the main features to look out for. And then it's just the fact that the enemy is very cunning and knows what it's doing, and is not only aware of our ignorance and exploits it, but whenever we start to become wise to it, is just so much better at manipulating than the regular person, that even with a little bit of knowledge, it can be very difficult to navigate that situation when it's so far out of the ordinary person's normal frame of reference, where it's like, you know, we don't most people just don't think like that. They don't think in terms of this kind of just strategic evil of how to manipulate and exploit other people and use their weaknesses. So well, yeah, I'd say that's a starting point for a starting point for why evil is prevalent. Now, of course, there are all of the specific mechanisms by which it becomes prevalent. That's kind of the bulk of Lobachevsky's book, is what he calls ponerogenesis. So these are the processes of the genesis of evil, how it actually gets to the level of like what he called the pathocracy of communism in the 20th century, for instance.
Yeah. So how do we first of all recognize political evil? Because, you know, it's on it's commonly, you know, nested in various layers of, you know, deception and cunning, and also fight political evil.
Well, one of the things about evil that Lobachevsky points out is that it's kind of a it scales. It's the same on every level. So the dynamics of political evil are the same as the dynamics of evil in a family, even in a house, evil in a household. So the place to start, I'd say, is actually not necessarily even focusing on political evil. It is to just first understand the very basics, and that can be as simple as reading a couple books on psychopathy and narcissism, and because one of the kind of amazing things about just doing that is that this is something that's been that Lobachevsky pointed out. It's also something that several people that are kind of alive today and talking about these kinds of issues, like Joshua Slocum on Disaffected, or like Sandra Brown, who's done research on women who love psychopaths, and just kind of countless others, is that when a person has kind of like some kind of intimate relation with, let's say, a psychopath, whether that's in a romantic setting, or just a family relation, or like a business relation, the experience kind of makes them think they're going crazy. They don't know what's going on. It's like getting hit by a truck and not even knowing where the truck came from, or that it was even a truck. It kind of throws you for a loop, and this can last for decades. So if your mother or your father is like a malignant narcissist, you might not even realize it for 20 or 30 years, and then you just might come across a book or an article describing the phenomenon, and then it's like the lights go off in your head, and it's oh, okay, all the puzzle pieces fit together now. Now I understand what was going on, and this is like this phenomenon repeats so often that it's like, I think more people should kind of study it. This this total change in one's in the ideas and the beliefs and even the emotions that are tied up in these experiences, how they can just totally reshape and come into focus in a new way just by looking at some objective information about it. So this is actually what Lobachevsky recommends. The first step is just getting some basic information, statistical and descriptive, about the nature of personality disorders, and like looking at some case studies and other experiences from other people and the experiences that they describe. And then once that happens, that's kind of the kindergarten level. It's what you need to be able to go on to anything more complex or on a wider scale. Of course, it can start in the other direction. It can start on the macro scale, and then you can learn about it on the individual scale. That would be, I'd say that would probably be reserved for a situation of kind of, well, maybe it'll apply today, of like overt political oppression but kind of with hands-on or personal experience with the authorities. Because like for a guy like Lobachevsky had his school training, his university training that he'd had, and clinical experience in psychopathology, but he also had the experience of getting arrested by the security services and tortured in prison. And that kind of experience is kind of a crash course in evil, to be able to see. Well, he also had his indoctrination professor, in the last year of his studies. That kind of one-on-one experience with a person who totally lacks a conscience is probably the best teacher. So unless we want to kind of like volunteer ourselves for that kind of like hands-on experience, I'd say the best thing to start out with is to read a couple books on psychopathy, like whether it's like Robert Hare's Without Conscience or Hervé Koehli's Mask of Sanity. Or, I mean, there's tons of books on psychopathy. Most of them are, well, some are better than others, but most of them have some pretty basic information that you can get if you just search Amazon or something like that. And so then, as for how to fight it, well, that's actually one way of fighting it. The more people are aware, the greater the number of people who are aware of it, and the greater degree to which they understand it, that really narrows the field of action for evil people. When a psychopath is exposed, typically he'll either have to leave his corporation that he's been burning to the ground, move to another city to find a fresh pool of victim candidates, or get sent to prison. Exposing a psychopath for what they are kind of really hampers their style and their ability for free movement, you might say. And that's because one of the primary ways in which psychopaths operate is through deception, through a strategic hiding of their true nature. They put on, as Koehli called it, a mask of sanity. They pretend to be normal. They pretend to have emotions. They pretend to think and feel and act like normal people, but it's literally an act. One of the stories that's always stuck with me from Robert Hare is that he was consulting with, I think it was Nicole Kidman for a movie. Maybe it was a different actress, but I'm pretty sure it was Nicole Kidman. And she was kind of asking for advice on how to accurately portray a psychopath. And so Hare gave her, I don't know if he gave the scenario or if he kind of utilized it from the script, but basically this woman, a female psychopath, is driving down the road, sees this car accident, and finds that in this car accident, there's a mother and her child has died in the accident. And this mother is, naturally distraught and, is over the child and crying and devastated by the loss of her child. So the female psychopath psychopath just kind of like watches for a while, and then that night at home practices in front of the mirror making those facial expressions of grief and distress, and and the ultimate kind of the deepest form of sadness. Practices in front of the mirror to get the movements right, because a psychopath in a normal situation, that will not move them at all. They lack that they lack that basic degree of human affect, of human emotion. And so when people figure that out, like they think it's weird and they think it's evil. So if a person, and even if they make a mistake about it, like if a person's having a bad day and doesn't show the proper emotion for a certain situation, people will be like, what's up with that person? Like maybe it's, to use a similar example, there have been several cases like this of parents who maybe have lost their child or a loved one, who are then interviewed on TV, and whether it's whether it's because they themselves might be psychopaths, or it's just this new environment and they don't know how to behave and they're acting strangely, they might like laugh or smile and not give the impression of having lost a loved one recently. And so people look at that and they go, there's something weird about that. And so if a person were to use that example with Nicole Kidman and Robert Hare, if the mother in that situation were to just be like, I can make another one, people might be, people would be pretty, people would not have a positive reaction to such an unmotherly response and such an inhuman response. So when a psychopath gets exposed like that, naturally they got to get out of town, because usually it means that some misdeeds will be exposed that will result, again, like I mentioned in a different example, result in them being thrown off an iceberg, or lynched in a back alley somewhere, or otherwise disposed of, because that's traditionally how humanity has dealt with that problem. Like there's an Inuit group who called such people Kulangeta, I believe. And when this one anthropologist or psychologist was spending some time with these people, and they described basically the psychopathic personality, the person who never worked, and when all the rest of the men were out hunting, would stay back in the tribal area and sleep with other people's wives and cause mischief. They said, well, what would happen to that person? And say, oh, well, someone would probably push them into the ice water when no one else was looking, or they might have a hunting accident. So that's traditionally how this problem has been dealt with.
Yeah, that's the from Albert Camus summarized the Stranger as his book as, he who does not cry at his mother's funeral will be like driven out or chastised or killed by society. That's
well, and like there's there are always exceptions, right? And so we should try to avoid making like a hard rule of something, because maybe the reason that someone doesn't cry at their mother's funeral is because their mother was the psychopath, right? And it's like, okay, sorry, but you were a terrible person and I have no love for you and I can't cry, because I'm actually glad that you're gone, because you made my life a living hell. So that's always a possibility. So, but I get the point. And
yeah, to take a slightly different tack, what do you think currently are the greatest problems impeding like just planetary unification, having a good world that everyone wants to live in, etc.?
Well, I'll start just with the obvious one, which is what I already mentioned, is like an almost complete lack of knowledge about this kind of thing. So that's the first one. Then, like, wrapped up in that is all of the reasons. Like, so why are people so dumb? Is one way of putting it. And you can look at, of course, like, you've got guys like is it Ed Dutton, his book like Breeding the Human Herd on Eugenics and Dysgenics, who basically argues that the past 150 years plus has been just a dysgenics, nightmare of people getting objectively less intelligent and less healthy. And so you can combine that with all kinds of other factors like people's health is just in general terrible. They eat bad foods and they get diseases and like inflammation, and that literally affects their capacity to think and to think clearly. And they might not even have time to think clearly because they're too busy trying to make money. Because the economic environment that we're finding ourselves in these days is not really conducive to deep thought. Even as it, the 50s and 60s were way better, like just objectively. And so there seems to be this just a constellation of everything that can go wrong, going wrong, and contributing to this just mess of a time that we're living in. So I'd say there are, it's hard to single out the biggest factors. I'd say, well, okay, it's people's, we can divide it into, I'll divide it into three. So you've got the physical kind of just basic physical bodily layer of being. And so that would just have to do with our level of health in general. And you can go into various areas there of, the amount of toxins toxins, fake foods, all kinds of pollutions, whether that's like electromagnetic or chemical, that affect the brain and affect our ability to think and feel at an optimal level. And this is actually this is a part of Adrian Rain's book, is it Anatomy of Violence? I'm pretty sure that's what the name of his book is. And he points out some very simple things, like in relation to evil, which the thing that we've been discussing. He advises several interventions to kind of eliminate the problem of violence, and one of them is simple as omega-3 supplementation. Like when you give fish oils to prison inmates, the number of violent incidents in the prison actually goes down. Like you get someone's brain functioning at kind of even just a basic level that isn't totally dysfunctional, and amazing things start happening. So that's the physical level. The intellectual layer, the intellectual kind of mental layer, is the one I mentioned first. Is that's actually taking the time to learn something. So I think what you're doing is great. What everyone with a YouTube channel that's designed to kind of get information to people is a good thing, because the more people know, the more they're exposed to information that can make a difference either in their own lives or in the wider world around them. That's a good thing, and that is made easier again by kind of clearing up your brain by getting healthy, exercising, working out, eating good foods, avoiding ingesting crap. That's another thing. And then emotionally, that's the trickier one, because the emotional kind of component of humanity is the one in which it's the one that allows for personal transformation. Like that's where personal transformation takes place, is through the activation and dynamic actions of emotions and instincts, like on this very basic level. That's why Dabrowski called one of his best books the multi-levelness of emotional and instinctive functions. It's because without that emotional center in one, it's hard to, first of all, even have the motivation to do anything. You need that emotional motivation for that's the first thing anyone needs, is a motivation to do something. And so clearing up one's body and kind of gaining some emotional clarity and the ability to actually feel I'd say higher emotions is kind of all essential. And all of the things that are essential for the individual the individual growth that will allow for a better society and better relations, among people on the earth. All of the things conducive to that are being bombarded on all levels, whether it is, again, through the physical, the emotional environment that we're in, and the intellectual environment that we're in. So I'd say the thing that needs to be focused on is to basically change one's own environment. Look at the world that you're in, the specific environment you're in, and notice what you can change about it. And a lot of that stuff is actually very easy, or very basic, not necessarily easy, like identifying certain foods or drugs that you're taking that are hindering your cognitive and emotional functioning, and creating an intellectual environment where you interact with interesting and smart people and learn new things and try to understand the world that we're living in, and the kind of wider philosophical framework of how we understand the world, how we understand how everything works, and emotions too. If you're in a terrible job with terrible people that you're working with, and just a terrible work climate, maybe you can try to find a better one. And again, everything starts on that individual level. So any kind of big social change, I mean, it has to start with individuals. It's not like I don't think that we can just put the right person in the position of president, although it would help, and then everything's better all of a sudden. No, it's still people still have to deal with their own crap and kind of transform themselves in order for anything greater to emerge, I think.
Yeah, that's I remember I was watching it was Jordan Peterson answering a question on, like, should we be concerned about the World Economic Forum, and he says, like, yes, but not to the exclusion of making your bed and organizing your life and doing good things. So I think that's relevant. On the tag of the at the intellectual / ideas level, the way we initially got connected was around 6 months ago. I asked, what is the role of the CTMU in fighting the Great Reset and the and logocracy, or that might be Lobachevsky's term, but in general. So just what are your thoughts on that?
Repeat the question.
What is the role of the CTMU in fighting? Well, the question was in particular the Great Reset, but just political evil in general, etc.
Well, I think that on a basic level, it has to do with the worldview that one has shapes who you are, who that person is. It shapes how they see the world, how they see themselves in the world, what they think is possible, and what they either implicitly or explicitly think is impossible. And if you have a poor model of the world, you won't have a good idea of the things that are possible and impossible. And you might have a completely delusional idea of the world. You might not even think that there's anything wrong with the World Economic Forum or something like that. What we need is essentially, just like we need to kind of clean up our bodies, we need to clean up our ideas and bring order to them and put them in the framework that they map to reality. So that is I think maybe that's kind of what I think the role of the CTMU is to provide that accurate map of reality, so that we then understand the things that are possible and impossible, and how that actually works. So it's the same dynamic that I mentioned with when if you've had an encounter or a close relationship with a psychopath and you don't know what was going on, when you finally find out about it and you're like, oh, that's how it works. So it's like with reality, it's the same game. Oh, that's how it works. That's how reality works, right? And so this is a point that I really liked about, or that was included in Langen's meta-religion paper, is that it seems kind of just like an obvious starting point, is that, okay, well, we've got all these conflicting religions, we've got all these, conflicts, whether it's even between individuals or groups, because you're gonna disagree on something with your next door neighbor, or some of your closest friends or family members. So how do we kind of it's kind of a cliche, but overcome those differences? Well, we can identify the common principles, the kind of basic universal truths, and lay them out in such a way that kind of is an understanding for it's a way of placing ourselves in the world and understanding our place in the world. And when we do that, it becomes when you have that kind of objective, realistic knowledge about reality, then I'll relate this back to possibilities. Then you can understand what is possible, what it is possible for a group of people to do, a group of people who kind of share that kind of understanding about the way that reality works. And when you have an understanding of the way reality works, you can understand the processes by which to act in the world. That's a kind of a very general way of putting it, because I'm not saying what the actual steps necessarily will be. It's kind of like these will be the principles underlying a kind of shared vision for people who understand reality and understand how to act within it. And so to relate that to logocracy is Lobachevsky's descriptor for a form of government and society that is based on true principles. So based on truths about human nature and the wider reality in which we find ourselves. So it's kind of tautological in the sense that that the best form of government will be the one based on the most universal truths, and like the truths are the well, I'm terrible at forming tautologies, but or circular arguments. But it's this idea of a government that's actually a form of government that actually takes into account the way humans are actually made, like the way the basics about human nature, and not either gross oversimplifications of human nature, or things that we just get wrong about it, things that we project onto human nature that aren't actually true, like the whole blank slate kind of thing. It's like, oh, well, humans are just there's nothing to them. We can just form them from nothing, essentially. That's not the way humans work. Humans have a base, humans have they're born with certain architecture, certain tendencies that express themselves in life. It's kind of just it's the most obvious things that, well, it's funny that the kind of some of the biggest thinkers of the last 150 years can have been so blind to what is just staring them in the face, which is some of the very basics about human nature that are just kind of like inescapable. So logocracy is basically the starting point is, well, what are some basic truths about human nature, and how should we organize politically that takes those things into account? Because if you create a form of government that is antithetical to human nature, it's not going to work. It's kind of like that. Again, this comes back to the CTMU and like the map of reality. If your map of human reality is fundamentally flawed in some sense, it's not going to work. And as much as you try, and as much as you try over and over to make it work, it's still not going to work, because you're not going to be able to reshape human nature. And the same thing applies on the wider, in a wider sphere of reality itself, of which, human reality is a subset. If you have a bad model of reality and you try to act using that model, you're going to run up against obstacles within the world. So you need an accurate model of reality in order to act within the world. And so that will apply on, just like evil scales on all levels. Well, so does one's understanding of the very basics of reality. So you're going to have that dynamic is going to scale, whether you're talking about reality as a whole, the universe and all and everything, or whether you're talking about navigating an interpersonal relationship. The same dynamics are going to apply. I guess you could say, like in CTMU, the same grammar is going to apply.
Yeah, it seems like in kind of circles adjacent to your own, there are two kind of countervailing perspectives of either either the world and the global power structure is in the phase of like imminent collapse, is going to or will be permanently in a state of stable totalitarianism. In your view, which is worse, which is more likely, etc.?
That, I'll say I have no idea. I'll just kind of throw some ideas out there. So I personally don't know what's going to happen. I don't have the foggiest idea, but I can throw some guesses around. So if there's going to be stable totalitarianism, I still don't think it's going to be exactly what the people pushing for that totalitarianism want. I think that they'll probably fail to fully implement their vision. Now, that's not to say that they won't implement a significant part of their vision. I just think that there are enough wild cards that have been and will and can be thrown into the mix to kind of make their vision incomplete in its in its manifestation and in what they're able to bring about. How did you summarize the first option?
That the world and the global power structure in general is
going to collapse, right?
Yeah, there's going to be an imminent collapse of all of that.
Yeah. Well, I'm open to both options. Well, okay, let me put it this way. So one of the things that I've written about numerous times is this idea of secular cycles. Lobachevsky writes about this in the context of what he calls a hysterical cycle, or a hysterical cycle, a cycle of hysteria. But if we look at history, there are identifiable civilizational and societal cycles. So empires rise and fall, and within any empire or any any nation, there are rises and falls within the bigger cycle. And these have been traditionally associated with kind of agrarian societies, but they're also associated with industrial societies. They just manifest in slightly different ways, and the factors going into these dynamics are slightly different, but still largely the same. And so Peter Turchin is one of the guys that I think is the best at laying out these cycles. But whether it's Turchin or a few other options on the table, they identified this time as this crisis period. So the crisis period usually manifests in some kind of collapse. And now this will be either it can be civil war, it can be foreign invasion and takeover, it can be just a complete disintegration and the society itself just completely disintegrates, and all its, the people who aren't dead just get integrated into their closest neighbors, so that the existing social and political structure can just kind of cease to exist. There are various options for how a collapse can take place, but what the important thing about collapses and crises, and the crises that lead to them, is that societies always, well, except in the case where you just kind of wiped off the map, societies always rebuild in some way. The question is how we would rebuild. So it's possible that there will be a collapse, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't have totalitarianism, because the totalitarians can be the ones that rebuild society. So we've basically got several options, or I'll limit it to two. We've got two options for the rebuilding, because there will be some kind of crisis. How that manifests, we're not, no one can know for sure, but there will be some kind of crisis in the Western world, particularly in the United States, and we're kind of in the process of it now. So depending on whether that's a complete collapse and disintegration or not, then you've got the question of, well, what will the form of the rebuilding take? Because just over 100 years ago, the Russian Empire experienced its own end of a secular cycle, World War I and the Russian Revolution, which was rebuilt after the collapse as the Soviet Union, which is the pathocratic exemplar that Lobachevsky wrote his book about. The rise of the rise of communism, so-called, in 1917, in the 20s in the USSR, which led to the imposition of communism in the Eastern Bloc countries, and the wave of communist or communist adjacent revolutions across the world in the 20th century. That started in 1917. And that was the result of the rebuilding that took place after the collapse of the Russian Empire. So there's that kind of fork in the road that we've got, humanity as a whole, but also, each kind of nation individually has in some sense, the choice of what direction they're going to take. And that can be like in this, in Langen's kind of parasitic divergence model, we can think about it in those terms. It can be, we can have how does he call it? Like the human singularity, or what's the other singularity?
Tech singularity. Tech singularity.
Yeah, the tech singularity. Right, the tech singularity. So we can, there's always the possibility of things turning around for the better. Now that possibility can get like vanishingly small, but it's always a possibility or a probability. It's never kind of completely off the table. So things don't look very good right now. I'll never I'm kind of an optimist by nature, but I'm a pessimistic optimist. So while I think the chances of a human singularity are while I think that that's a possibility, and I hope it'll happen, I don't think the chances are very good, at least at this point. But but there's always a chance. I'm the kind of Dumb and Dumber. So you're telling me there's a chance, right? So 1 in a million or whatever. But I think that that's just one thing to keep in mind, is that things can collapse, but that means that's actually, on the one hand, that's a hopeful sign, in that, well, maybe we'll be able to rebuild something better. But it's also, okay, well, things can collapse. Maybe that's good, because the big plans for a stable totalitarian system are eliminated forever. Or maybe that's the worst thing that we can imagine, because we'd lose our current way of life. But after a collapse, that's when the totalitarians can rebuild. That's when when they can impose a great reset on humanity by building again from the ashes of what we once were. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. I really have no way of judging for myself what the relative probabilities might be, but I'd just say that those are some options to kind of keep in mind as we progress through, the 2020s, which are kind of the crisis period for Western civilization, and by extent, probably a whole lot of the rest of the world.
Yeah, again, I'm kind of jumping around here, but the first thing you said as a thing you're enthusiastic about is UFOs. This has been in the news a lot lately. What's broadly speaking your take on that?
Broadly speaking, that UFOs are real, and that they're probably not as nice and cuddly and fluffy as a lot of people seem to want to think that they are, or not the UFOs, but the occupants, the people behind the people or things behind the UFO phenomenon. So I'd say that's where I am broadly, because in UFOs you've got like a bunch of dichotomies, a bunch of kind of, I wouldn't say them dualisms, but kind of dual and opposing views. So you've got the kind of Stephen Greers of the world who think that the aliens are here for, they're just the best kind of people, and it's racist to think aliens might be evil. And then you've got the people, of course, that think that they are evil. You've got the so-called Collins elite, which is apparently this group in like the defense intelligence establishment, who are kind of like hardcore Christians that see the phenomenon as totally demonic, to the point where they think that that it shouldn't even be studied, which I think is going a bit too far, because I think you should study evil, maybe not engage in it in certain ways, but that you should actually study it. So then there are the people who think that they're just like ET, a totally just another species from a different part of the galaxy, or another galaxy, that have come here, and that they're kind of like us in a certain sense, and that they're just kind of interstellar travelers. And then there are those like John Keel or Jacques Vallée, who see the phenomenon as for Keel, he said he talked about it in terms of ultra terrestrials. At David Grush, who testified at the recent congressional hearing, threw out the possibility that they're hyperdimensional in nature. Essentially coming from a hyperspatial level of being, that then project like their four-dimensional selves into 3D reality when they interact with it. That's kind of I'm more I'd come down on the kind of ultra-terrestrial, hyperdimensional, evil aliens sides of those equations. I guess that's the simplest way that I'd put that. But yeah, I'd be happy to go into as much depth as possible, because I've always been interested in UFOs.
Yeah, and I guess that seems to at least that kind of perspective on UFOs seems to require a more inclusive view of reality and how it operates than like standard mechanistic materialism. So what adjustments to your worldview do you think you need to make to accommodate just basically what's observed, regardless of interpretation of UFOs?
Well, if I understand the question, then I'd throw out a couple things. Is that this is also where something like the CTMU would come into play, because like some of the ideas, or kind of the extensions of the ideas that I just mentioned, are kind of really far out. Like they're outside of like you said, the standard materialistic worldview. We have to make a place in our minds and in our worldview for what you might call consciousness, in a manner that it's not accepted or discussed in the standard materialistic framework. So we kind of have to turn things around, which is, I think, what the CTMU is great for, is fully integrating consciousness, cognition, experience into the nature of reality, and that we can't understand reality without that as a very fundamental as the fundamental aspect of reality. Reality is on a very basic level mental. You can't have physical reality without that mental component to reality. And so I think that's kind of the starting point, I think, for a worldview that can encompass what the UFO or UAP, what that phenomenon is, what non-human intelligence is, how to fit that into our worldview. Because I don't think it will be as simple as just another species from another planet who's visited here. I don't think that the data, even within within ufology, would. I don't think that that's the best explanation for the data that we've had, either through the modern history of UFOs. You can start either in the 40s or like in the 1890s, or whether we look back at the idea that that a lot of ufologists put forward, that this phenomenon has been with humanity for the entire history of humanity. That in a sense, it is a fundamental part of our reality. It's not something that's just it's not something that's new, although it may have manifested in new ways over the past 100 years. But it's something that is fundamental to the nature of the world that we experience. It's just one that we don't understand, and maybe through a shift in worldview, that a shift in worldview like the CTMU can provide, or before that, like I like Whitehead and process reality, process philosophy. That too. If there's a change, that change in worldview, that kind of philosophical outlook can provide the space, I think, in order to understand the phenomenon that we've experienced, not only for the past 100 years or so, but potentially for all of human history, and what the nature of that interaction is. And as to that, the nature of that interaction, it can go back to one of the the first questions that you asked on the nature of the metaphysical nature of evil. Is that I think that a lot of what we're experiencing, a lot of what we're encountering, not necessarily all of it, in all of its aspects, but to a large degree, is the physical manifestation of that what I might call evil at a higher level.
That's the Chris Lang actually says something similar in response to a question about UFOs. Talks about this in terms of object observer couplings, that just because something is observed doesn't mean that's necessarily a physical thing, that you need a broader and more inclusive view. And Jung also talked about this when this was starting to emerge, I guess, in the 1940s, is that if you extract out Jung and to some extent Langen's model of the kind of psychological substrate of reality, that his idea was that we're essentially imposing that it's essentially a reflection of our anxieties about this, it's all these super alien intelligences which have very, very mechanical, like, spaceships, and are abducting people. So that's another, I don't know, that wasn't really a question, but
well no, that's cool. Just to kind of go with that, so just to throw a crazy idea out there, so there is the kind of fully psychological explanation for UFOs, and I think that's the direction that Jung was going in. Oh, what did I think I just read something recently about that, that he kind of, when he wrote his book on UFOs, he was kind of looking at it as a fully psychological phenomenon. I think I read that after he'd read the book, by the end of his life, he'd kind of taken a more objective view of it, of UFOs as a more objective phenomenon than purely kind of psychological. But and then there's John Keel, who kind of had a similar but a bit crazier idea than Jung, that the phenomenon, well, it depends on what period of John Keel's kind of career and thinking you're looking at, but he had the idea that the phenomena associated with UAP were almost entirely hallucinatory in nature, but that there was some objective phenomenon that was kind of the source for the hallucination. It wasn't purely a psychological thing. It wasn't purely sourced in an individual mind, for instance, like you might hypothesize a schizophrenic's hallucinations are or might be. Basically that a person can hallucinate something that isn't there, and there's nothing out there that's kind of prompting the senses, the vision, than just their own mind. Keel said, okay, no, there's something real that's there, but it's just essentially the appearance of it that is hallucinatory, that it will shape itself, and that the mind will shape the vision of what's going on, according to an unknown set of rules. But now here's an even crazier idea, that take all of that as true, but then so that there's this that there's an objective phenomenon that is somehow part of this, and then there's the individual, the observer's response to it, the way in which they perceive it. And let's even say that the perceiver can influence to some degree how it is perceived, almost like a hallucination of some sort. But what if all that is true, and that the phenomenon itself, or how to put it? Well, let's use a hypothetical. So let's say that there's something someone encounters, and they perceive it in a certain way, and it's being shaped according to their mind to some degree. Like maybe it has to do with like the shape of the actual UFO, like the shape that the metal apparently seems to take. Now imagine that craft encounters a something to make it crash, and that it actually takes that form, and people can actually independently study that crashed UFO, which I think has probably happened numerous times, but that basically human consciousness, human mentality, the human psyche might in some way individually or collectively influence the form that the phenomenon takes, but that it takes an objective form. So it's not just entirely hallucinatory. It's like the UFO takes a particular shape because of that, and that's actually the shape that it happens to take. It's well, I can I can go on. You can apply the same thing to like whoever the occupants are. Maybe there's some malleability to the forms that this phenomenon can take, and that human consciousness has some effect on that, but that in a sense it's totally real at the same time, totally objective, or maybe not as objective as we like to think of these sorts of things, but they might take certain forms and be able to stay in those forms in certain situations, like let's say through death or malfunction. Does that make sense? Do you get what do you hear where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I do. I think that's I think that's a good, an interesting thing. What I'd be interested in looking at, and then I think we're gonna go to different topic, but like the it is what is the reliability, in my own view, of like the specific people who have made claims to have seen or had physical experiences with alien crafts, because there there is also the element that the that a lot of these people could be essentially frauds and hustlers, and the or that the or that it is towards some nefarious purpose. Like, you see this being kind of recently and somewhat suspiciously pushed by the kind of military industrial security complex in the last few years. But I guess another topic, which is kind of probably the most germane to a lot of people's lives with respect to political ponerology, is like, you did a series on your Substack on the psychology of totalitarianism, which I read last year. Just broadly speaking, what's your best summary of what happened during COVID-19?
I would say that it was a I'll preface this by saying that I think you're kind of alluding to the debate among kind of the debate among theorists on what actually happened, and there's of course the conspiracists and the what might we call the other group that's kind of like Desmond. Well, we could say, okay, the evil conspiracy or the mass formation.
Yeah,
it seems to be a debate among the the COVID critical people that didn't kind of just totally buy into the official narrative.
Or
everyone
tried their best and no one's that bad.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I would say it was I would say it's a combination of all of the above, because this is one of the main points that Lobachevsky makes in Ponerology about human nature, is that human nature is varied, that we're not all the same. So, for example, you might have the people, that last option that you threw out there, that everyone was just trying their best, and it's kind of like the assumptions behind that view of the situation are that everyone's kind of the same, on a basic level. We've all kind of got the basic same makeup, and when confronted with this new situation, we all just kind of tried our best. Well, I'd say that's blatantly not true. It's true to a degree with a certain number of people. There are a certain number of people during COVID who just did their best. There are also a number of people who did their best to totally exploit the situation and use it to implement like totalitarian controls, basically worldwide. So it depends on what the best is that people were trying for, because there isn't just one best that people strive for. There's a whole variety of bests that people aim towards. So that's why I say it was a combination. That there was that's the thing well, on a very broad level, I'm just writing an article about this right now, so it's on the top of my mind. Like, Lobachevsky divides people into normal people, like 90% of the population ish, give or take, and evil people, ponerogenic, or people that have ponerogenic factors, whether that's a deleterious traumatic brain injury or a hereditary personality disorder. And where was I going with that? Now I forget. But okay, yeah. So these two broad people. So on the broadest level, on the most simplest level, you can't say everyone's the same, but you can have, like, for our purposes, these two broad divisions within which there's a lot of variety still. But in these two broad divisions, you've got two kind of antithetical modes of operation that might work together in some ways and might be at odds in others. So when I say it's a combination of the two, among normal people, you had largely a mass formation, as Desmond puts it. You had mass hysteria. You had people trying to do their best in a lot of times, which I don't even think that's the best way of putting it. They were doing what people do when they get hysterical, which is usually not their best. You know, it's usually people aren't at their best when they're in a state of like mass social contagion of chaotic social emotions. And then you had like other people who, broadly speaking, can't be called normal, who said, oh, you know, not only have we been planning for scenarios like this, we've been planning on how to exploit scenarios like this for very specific purposes, and let's, you know, try to implement as many of those things as possible. So I think that the phenomenon of the response to COVID was largely a combination of normal human psychology and exploited human psychology, which was exploited by other types of humans that it is their nature to exploit the exploitable parts of normal humanity and our, you know, all of our weaknesses. So basically, that's why I say it's kind of all of the above, is that all of this stuff was going on, and you can't so I don't think it's helpful to say it's just the one, like, oh, this was just a grand conspiracy, because even if it were, you know, just a grand conspiracy, there's you can't ignore I don't think you can ignore all of the aspects of, you know, all of the non-conspiratorial aspects that contributed to how it all played out and how those things play out, how those things play out in general. You know, I don't think that the worldly, you know, human power possessors are capable of the degree of control that a lot of the conspiracy theorists, and I'm not saying that pejoratively, you know, think they are, but also I think that there's a lot more conspiracy and you know, kind of evil deals going on and evil plans being implemented that the people who are, you know, anti-conspiracy theory, it would, you know, they should probably consider that there's a lot more evil in the world and a lot more directed, you know, conscious, deliberate evil than they might have previously imagined.
Yeah, this is just kind of lightning round. This can be like political, philosophical, whatever, but is there anything you believe which you can't prove?
Oh yeah, for sure, because you know, I'm not that smart. You know? so you know, ideally I would try, you know, I would not ideally I would hope to categorize the things I can't prove, or at least, you know, have very good reasons for, you know, not as beliefs, but in practice I don't think I'm, you know, intellectually, cognitively, and, you know, and emotionally advanced enough to be able to always make those distinctions and to be careful about it. I'm just, you know, I'm just a human who you know, probably has a whole bunch of unjustified beliefs that I haven't you know, rooted out yet.
Yeah. What are your favorite like books? Because that's what you said. Your first thing you like.
Okay. Novels. I like 1984, Dune, and okay, and so those are kind of the classics that I like. Two of the classics that I like. I could go on forever about books, but I'll limit myself to some more a more obscure trilogy, the Mist trilogy that I read as a kid, that I absolutely loved, based on the Cyan games Mist and Riven. There's a trilogy of books, and I read them when I was young, and just they're by I think Rand Miller and another guy. Oh, I can't remember his name, but I've read them multiple times, and, you know, they're not. I don't think anyone would consider them to be masterpieces, like maybe like a lot of people consider Dune to be, but they've got a special place on my bookshelf. So that's fiction. Nonfiction, probably In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Uspensky, which is his account of his experiences with G. Gurdjieff in Russia in the 19 teens, I believe, maybe, yeah, in the teens before the Russian Revolution. And well, that's tough. There's a ton of nonfiction books that I like. Probably I like parapsychology, and one of the best books on parapsychology I've read is First Sight by James Carpenter. We've talked about it multiple times on Mind Matters. And then for writers, I like John Keel, who I'll just read kind of anything by. I like John Keel. I like Laura Knight Yadchik. I like Gurdjieff himself. I like Chris Langan's books, and lots more, but I can't list all the books.
Nice. What do you want your legacy to be?
I'd be happy just having put out the new edition of Ponerology and getting it to a wider audience. So I'm happy to have achieved that one thing in my life. And other than that, my only hope is that perhaps I can do more. But we'll see about that. I don't know. Don't know if it'll happen, but we'll see.
Yeah, I used to steal the question from Lex Friedman that he asks at the end of everything of like what's your advice to young people? But since I'm a young person, I just switched it up to what's your advice to me specifically.
That's really tough, but I would say try as much as possible to avoid the world that we're living in breaking you, because I think that a lot of young kids are getting broken in various ways, and whether it's through the political ideologies, or even the kind of philosophical ideologies that are the main ones on offer. I think those are breaking a lot of young people's minds, essentially, and probably in some ways that may be irreversible, or at the very least will be very difficult to come back from once once the effect of essentially the mass formation wears off. And so I would probably say that that there is an alternative. There is a better world, and that better world is most readily found among people who reject, or people who have the capacity to reject the main options on the menu. And that, so basically, that the things that you see around you on social media, in the news, among friend groups, like, that's not the possibilities for your life are not limited to those options, and that's a fulfilling life that is a fulfilling life that leaves you kind of, I would say, potentially even unbreakable, is possible, and that it's out there, and that it's just a matter of first just saying no to what is on offer, being smart about it, and finding the alternative. And the alternative might not be obvious. You might not know it. You might not know where to look for it. But I think that if you do look for it, and if you are sincere in looking for it, that you will find it, and that that it's much more fulfilling than, you know, what you learn in school and what you think are the only options you have available.
Yeah, or I don't know your personal religious practice, but so I'll start with, do you believe in God, and if so, what is your conception of God?
Yes. Very briefly, I would say God is the well, if I could put it in two words, I would say cosmic mind. That God is kind of the totality of everything. God is everything in some sense, and that God is not a fully, you know, abstract, you know, something that you know, there is a mentality, a psyche that is directing the cosmos. And I would say that I could probably sum up my theological position in the word panentheism, that, you know, we all exist in God and God exists within all of us, and that I think that's very, you know, conducive to Langen's you know, CTMU in certain formulations.
Yeah, he uses those same ideas of panentheism and universal mind. So then towards that, what is, in your view, the meaning of life, the universe, everything? 42 is not allowed.
I would say that life, in some sense, existence in some sense, is a school where we must learn things, learn lessons, experience certain things, gain experience, gain knowledge through experience, and that every experience we have both contributes to that growth in our, you know, the segment of the reality that we can take into mind, the segment of reality that we can experience for ourselves as this kind of like tiny fragment of the whole. And that at the same time, every experience is an opportunity, that we are presented with options at every moment for how we will engage with that moment, how we will engage with the world around us. So that it's almost like every moment is a test, but not a test in the sense of like, oh, if I make the wrong decision in this next split second, you know, well, I've failed. Oh, I've failed. And then, like, I don't think it's that strict necessarily, maybe in some cases, but that every moment opens up to us the possibility for action and possibilities for action that that might not be completely obvious. And part of the learning is to understand, is to learn what those possibilities might be. You know, to learn that, let's say you're heading on a road, and at first you might just assume that road is the only option available, and then you realize that there are paths going off to the side, and actually there's this other road, you know, a mile to the side that actually goes to a different destination, and I think I want to go to that destination more than I want to go to the destination that this road is on. And so part of life, part of expanding one's part of gaining all of this experience is to take in a bigger chunk of reality, to understand a bigger chunk of reality, and therefore open up our possibilities, and that the possibilities that open themselves up might be kind of mind-blowing, you know, things that we probably wouldn't have considered prior to being aware of them.
Yeah. Do you any closing thoughts, closing message to me, to my audience, to just the ether, whoever has ears to hear and eyes to see?
No, I think I think I said everything I wanted to say. I would just say that if I ever do have any of those deep thoughts, you know, or messages that, like you mentioned, I've got my YouTube channel, Mind Matters, and I've got my Substack, Political Ponerology, and I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @RainDogBone. I don't use it very often, but you know, I'm still on there. So I'd say if you're interested, if any of your viewers and listeners are interested, just go to ponerology.substack.com, and that's where I post my writings. And yeah, that's probably it for me.
Yeah. Follow it. Follow all the things. The yeah. So thank you. Take care.